Welcome back to the American Revolution, Lesson 3, Battleground Shift, Topic 3, Fighting in the South. This is our final section for this lesson. Related vocabulary terms, we've already talked about blockade and privateer, which were part of the last section, so we can move on. There's no new related vocabulary for this section. Fighting in the South is the largest part of this lesson. And again, fighting in the South is the subtopic early British success. Hit and run tactics. What's going on here? Or who's hitting and running who? Spain's help. I'm on the assumption they're going to help the Americans. American successes. We got some American wins. Haven't had W's in our corner in a while. Okay, and Cornwallis retreats. Well, who is Cornwallis? I mean, if he's British, this is good. If he's American, this is bad. So, there's what we're trying to figure out. We'll also look at the map on page 161, the Revolutionary War in the West and South, 1778 to 1781. Basically, shows me the war shifted from west to south in later years and summarizes this section as well. Once again, I won't go into detail here because we know them already, but as we read, we're using during reading strategies like making connections, personal connections, interacting with the text, and identifying how it's organized, thinking about historical inferences, looking for details, and clarify understanding with our photographs, charts, graphics, so we understand better and determine if things are fact or opinion. Okay, we'll use after reading strategies. Okay, and again, I'll quickly go through these. We'll do it in writing at the end. We'll respond to certain questions from the text and note any logical conclusions about the topic, form some opinions. Okay, and we'll evaluate. We'll use evidence to reach conclusions, form judgments. Again, this is often used with document analysis, but if we come to our own reflection at the end, if we come to our own inferences, or if we have our own insights when we evaluate, that's always a good thing. And into the reading we go, Fighting in the South. And we have our questions, the important questions here. And what are those questions? What was the result of the war in the South? What happened there? I saw something about a guy retreating, so I'm wondering what this means. What effect did the Patriot victory at Kings Mountain produce? Whoa, okay, so there are Patriot victories here. Where's Kings Mountain? I'm curious. We'll find out. And again, I don't like this question. It's why does conflict develop? We know why this conflict developed. We know why the Revolutionary War happened. We talked about that already. How does it end? To me, that's like the more important question. How's this thing finally wrap up? What leads it to wrap up? And I think we're getting to that. We're coming to that point soon. So, hey, let's get in because this is a long section. Right? So, under Fighting in the South on page 160, in the early years of the war, the Americans had won several battles in the South. In 1776, Patriot forces crushed Loyalists at the Battle of Moores Creek near Wilmington, North Carolina. They also saved the key ports of Charlestown, South Carolina, from the British. Although this was a small battle, its impact on the rest of the war was great. By 1778, these results, along with Patriot victories such as Saratoga, had convinced the British that bringing their old colonies back into the empire would not be easy. As a result, the British came up with a new plan to finish the war. The new British plan focused on the South, where there were many loyalists. The British hoped to use sea power and the support of loyalists to win important victories in the southern states. At first, the strategy worked. Okay, impact is an effect, if you're not familiar with that terminology. What I know, most of the battles so far have taken place either in New England or the Middle States. Some small skirmishes or tiny battles, small battles, seem to have secured the South until now. So we've reached a point where, the South is being looked at again. The British are turning their eye toward the South. And here's our sequence of events. Number one, attempts to end the revolt in New England in 1775 led to opening battles in New England, which ended with the British retreat from Boston in 1776. The British returned in force and took New York and Philadelphia in 1776 to 1777. So the Empire strikes back, right? In October of 1777, the British took a major loss at the Battle of Saratoga. This forced the British to withdraw from Philadelphia and retreat to New York as a stronghold. The British then switched plans. They hoped to take advantage of Loyalist support and divide the South from the northern states. Now, this has an interesting strategic insight here, or something we consider about the strategy. They tried to isolate New England, and it didn't work. They tried to attack the capital, Philadelphia, and that didn't work. So now they're trying the South. So they've tried New England, they've tried the middle states, and now they're trying the southern states. Let's see how things go. Early British success. In late 1778, British General Henry Clinton sent 3,500 troops from New York to take Savannah, Georgia. The British occupied the coastal city and controlled most of the state. You can see on the map Savannah there. Clinton himself led a force into the South in early 1780. In May, he led a second British attack on Charlestown. This time, the South Carolina city surrendered, and the British took thousands of prisoners. It marked the worst American defeat in the war. Actually happened in the winter, and Washington could not get there from where he was in New Jersey. He was at Washington's headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey. Couldn't get there. Bad winter that year. So, personal observation. If you didn't know, Howe was gone. His failure to follow through on plans to take the Hudson River and the loss at Saratoga ruined his reputation. To add insult to injury, Howe was forced to evacuate Philadelphia and return his fleet to New York. France's entrance into the war forced the British to concentrate their forces. And Henry Clinton was now the British commanding general in America. Okay, he was a junior officer of the Howe. He stepped up and took his job. So it's Clinton who's in charge. Question answer. So the siege of Charlestown looks like the beginning of a real win for the British in the war. It seems like you take Charlestown, a major port city, right? Kind of like New York City. And they tried to take that in the South, and this looks really good for them. After Clinton's victory, he returned to New York. He left General Charles Cornwallis in command of the British forces in the South. The Continental Congress sent forces under General Horatio Gates to face Cornwallis. The two armies met at Camden, South Carolina in August 1780. The British won this first encounter, yet Cornwallis soon found that he could not control the area he had conquered. He and his troops faced a new kind of warfare. This doesn't sound very good for the British here, leaving this, right? What I know, Gates was a general who claimed responsibility for the victory of Saratoga. But really, it was Benedict Arnold and Daniel Morgan that took the initiative and gained victory. I mean, yeah, Gates was in command, but his command was kind of sad. And really these other officers are the ones that pulled weight for Gates. They're the ones that did the real work behind the scenes. So Gates was once considered to replace Washington as the commanding general. And he's humiliated by this defeat, and his reputation is ruined. He actually retreated from the battlefield and ran a horse all the way into North Carolina to escape. So it didn't look good for him. He looked like a coward. So Gates is ruined. And there was talk of Gates replacing George Washington. Not anymore. Not after the Battle of Camden. Question and answer. So the Battle of Camden was the British. The British are once again victorious. But the end of the last paragraph seems to foreshadow some problems I had. Notice I even reacted to that when I read it. I was like, oh boy, that doesn't sound good on the end. Okay, hey, I'm on 161, in case you need to know. There is a map there, the Revolutionary War in the West and South, 1778 to 1781. Based on the map, the southernmost battle took place in Savannah in 1778. Savannah and Charlestown were likely captured because they were not only ports of trade, but were also excellent ports for the French in America should they decide to engage the British at sea. My point is that if the British didn't take these ports, the French might have used them as ports. And they're warm water ports. It's warm year-round down there. The French like that, So taking those ports kept them under British control, made it difficult for the French to supply the Americans, and took away potential safe harbors from the French. There's a little historical context there. I'm putting it in kind of a strategic context to see why the British would move south, other than to maybe gain some more support and isolate the South from the Middle and New England states. So yeah, to take these ports away from the French was probably a big deal in their thinking in this matter. Hit and run tactics, which moves us on to page 162. The British had counted on Loyalist support in the South. They received less help than expected. Instead, as British forces moved through the countryside, small forces of patriots attacked them. These bands of soldiers appeared suddenly. fired their weapons, and then disappeared. This hit and run technique caught the British off guard. Francis Marion was a successful Patriot leader. Marion, who was known as the Swamp Fox, operated out of the swamps of eastern South Carolina. He was quick and smart. One British colonel grumbled that the devil himself could not catch Marion. The Swamp Fox was his term because he was tricky, and he did not reveal himself unless he needed to. And you should see a similarity here to what was going on up north. We'll get to that in a minute. So once again, the Americans switched strategies when repelling sieges and fighting in open battles, with the British failed. When the open battle scenario doesn't work, they use hit and run techniques that we call guerrilla warfare today. So there's a little historical relevance here. The term guerrilla is a Spanish term meaning little war. Yes, if you're saying that this happened at Lexington and Concord, and if you're saying that this is very similar to what Washington did, yeah, you're right about that. Washington did this at Trenton and Princeton. It was basically a quick attack, a surprise attack, and it caught the British off guard. You kind of see this with John Paul Jones, too. So I'm actually doing a lot of compare contrast here, and I'm doing a lot of comparisons. So this strategy seems very successful for the Americans, and it's a strategy that works, especially when you have untrained soldiers, and especially when you don't have enough equipment to fight on an open battlefield, which the Americans didn't have. So these hit and run tactics were a problem for the British forces and presented a dilemma for the British. Now the British did it too, but think about it: who knows the land better, the British or the Patriots? So it did give the Patriots a bit of an edge. Spain's help. Great Britain also found itself with another new enemy. Spain declared war on Britain in 1779. The Spanish governor of Louisiana, Bernardo de Galvez, had tons of supplies and ammunition shipped up the Mississippi to American troops in the Northwest Territory. It was this help that it was with the help of George Rogers Clark capturing the key posts of Kaskaskia and Vincennes. Galvez also raised an army to fight the British. Galvez's forces drove the British out of the Gulf of Mexico region. Light bulb. This is why securing the frontier of the West was so important for the Americans. After Clark takes control of the major transport routes in the West, it makes it possible for Galvez and the Spanish to send goods up from Louisiana, up the Mississippi, to the United States. So the Spanish were able to supply the Americans using this route. Problem solution. The British were able to secure the southern ports from the Americas, but their own forces were being challenged in the Gulf of Mexico by France and Spain. The problem for the British is this constant threat of French and Spanish navies presented to them. The French and Spanish navies are now at war with Britain. So Britain can't focus its energies on blockading America. And because of that, it starts to poke holes in the blockade. It starts to poke holes in the British ability to keep the Americans from getting goods. So this is good for the Americans. Okay, so again, that overall strategy, what made the difference? American successes. After their victory at Camden, South Carolina, the British moved northward through the Carolinas in September 1780. Along the way, the British warned the local people to give up the fight for independence and join the British. If they refused, the British threatened to hang their leaders and lay their country to waste. The Americans who received this warning were mountain people, fiercely independent. They had been neither patriots nor loyalists until the British warning angered them. They formed a militia army and set out to force the British from their land. At Kings Mountain, the American militia force killed or captured a British-led loyalist force of about 1,000. The Patriot victory brought new support for independence from Southerners. Personal observation: if you want to gain the support of people, it's probably not a good idea to start with conversation by threatening them. Right? I mean, think about when someone does that to you. You better do that, or I'll beat you up, or I'll take this from you. It doesn't ever go over well. And when you're talking about these Southern guys from the Southern boys from the mountain area, they were pretty tough and they were pretty independent, and they did not like being threatened in this manner. So this backfires on the British. Probably not a good idea to threaten them. Think a nice letter about, oh, we're coming through, but we're not interested in hurting you. You can keep your independence. We're not bothering you. Probably would have went over better. But instead, they send this threatening statement out to their leaders, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you want to threaten somebody? Check this out, dude." So, question answer: the British success at Camden happened in August of 1780. Major Patrick Ferguson, under Cornwallis's orders, enters North Carolina to recruit loyalists and reinforce Cornwallis's position in South Carolina. The threat he presented, and he's the guy that did it, this Major Patrick Ferguson, the threat he presented to the Over Mountain men of the Carolinas provoked them to unite and defeat the British and their allies in October 1780. Only 2 months after the Camden victory, Kings Mountain proves a turning point for the Americans in the Southern campaign. So Kings Mountain is kind of like the Saratoga of the South. It really starts turning things around for the Americans in the South, and hence American successes. So, hey, let's see what happens next. In October 1780, Nathaniel Greene replaced Gates as commander of the Continental forces in the South. Rather than lead one attack on Cornwallis's forces, Greene split his army in two. In January 1781, one section defeated the British at Cowpen, South Carolina. Another section joined Francis Marion's raids. Greene combined his forces in March. Then he met Cornwallis's army at Guilford Courthouse in present-day Greensboro, North Carolina. Greene's army was forced to retreat, but the British sustained great losses in the process. General Cornwallis gave up the campaign to conquer the Carolinas. So it's a victory that actually leads to a defeat for the British. To sustain is to suffer or experience. What I know. Nathaniel Greene was George Washington's original appointment to command the Southern campaign. Greene is the one he wanted to send down to take command. The Continental Congress overrode Washington and sent Gates because Gates won at Saratoga, even though we know other generals really won the battle. When Gates fails, Greene takes command. He's one of Washington's trusted lieutenants and generals. Washington had once stated that if he were to fall in battle, it was Nathaniel Greene who should take command. And by the way, Greene was a Quaker. He defies his Quaker beliefs by serving in the Continental Army. Greene likely would have had a greater role after the war, but I should point out that he dies of sunstroke in 1786 while tending to a plantation in Georgia. So unfortunately, Greene, this is why we don't hear too much about him in our histories afterwards. He passed away suddenly. And because of this, he's obscured in history. What means obscured means he kind of like disappears out of history books, which is too bad because he was really a pivotal general in the South, and he literally guarantees us the success of the Southern campaigns. So, sequence of events. May 1780, British seize Charlestown. August 1780, we got a Brit victory at Camden. In October 1780, we got Kings Mountain, and things turn around in October 1780. And in January 1781, it's Gates with Morgan again. Morgan's there as well, and they defeat the Brits at Cowpens. Okay. I should point out, I didn't mention Guilford Courthouse here, and you'll notice that really the Patriots lose at Guilford Courthouse, but there's a reason why Greene retreated. Cornwallis got desperate, and in the middle of the fighting, when the two armies were kind of mixed in with each other, he started to use cannon on not just the Patriots, but his own men. He fired what was called grape shot, which is like a shotgun shell, into the forces. Not only does he wipe out Patriots, he's killing his own redcoats at the same time. He's literally firing at his own men out of desperation to beat the rebels. Greene sees this and goes, "To heck with this. We're out of here," and he retreats because he's not going to let his men die that way. So, kind of a gruesome thing to do that Cornwallis did, actually firing on his own troops like that. But that's what happens at Guilford Courthouse, and probably should have mentioned that in sequence of events. Hey, last subtopic here. So we know who Cornwallis is now. He's a British general. We see the word retreats. We're like, this is looking good for the Americans, right? Cornwallis realized the British had to act quickly to win the war. More French troops are coming to North America, and Patriots held Virginia. Troops and supplies are moving south. Okay, so this is good. Things are looking good. In April 1781, Cornwallis marched north to Virginia. His troops carried out raids throughout the region. General Washington sent Lafayette and General Anthony Wayne south to push Cornwallis back. Meanwhile, Cornwallis took shelter at Yorktown on the Virginia coast. The battle for the South was entering its final phase. And if you look at this and you're going, hey, this doesn't look good for the British, you would be correct. What I know, by 1780, the French were beginning to provide supplies, money, and naval support and troops to the American cause. In fact, up in Rhode Island, there was a fleet there just waiting. And they had brought money and they had brought supplies and there were troops. Cornwallis was very likely aware that time was running out and did his best to engage the Continental Army. Greene kept Cornwallis running around the South. In fact, if you look at my map at the green lines and all the short little battles that were going on all over the place, it looks like a zigzag pattern, like Greene was just trying to run Cornwallis out. And if you're thinking that, that's exactly what he was doing. So by 1781, the war in the South shifted from the British to the Americans as Cornwallis found himself running for cover in Yorktown. Ooh, how quickly the situation turns. And it did. Cornwallis basically had no supplies. He needed to be resupplied. His army was struggling. I mean, they'd been chasing Greene around for almost a year in the backcountry of the Carolinas. So they're out of supplies. They really need help. On page 163, there's this great political cartoon. And it's from a British print called The Horse America Throwing His Master. And the American Revolution was expensive and unpopular war by this time. And many British predicted that Britain would lose the war against the Americans. And even in Britain, they were starting to, the horse is America, and that's Cornwallis getting ready to get bucked right off the horse, knocked off the horse. He's done. And the feeling in Britain in 1779 is that this war was a waste of time and effort. Keep in mind, once the French and Spanish get in, this war starts to become very expensive for the British. Was it worth the effort? And once again, as the map points out, right, follow the green arrows. Since the loss at Camden, the Americans changed their strategy. Rather than fight the British on British terms, they made poor Cornwallis chase them throughout the Carolinas, forcing him to expend his supplies and meeting his forces only when they had the advantages or if there were no other choice presented itself, like at Guilford Courthouse. Okay, the plan worked. By late April 1781, Cornwallis is running out of supplies to fight and was forced to retreat to Yorktown. Little did he know that this would mark the end of the Southern campaign. Say, we're good. We reached the end. Let's do our recall. Fighting continued in the South as British successfully took the cities of Charlestown and defeated General Gates at Camden. However, the use of hit-and-run tactics that surprised the British, Spanish help, and the victory at Kings Mountain over the British reversed British successes in the South. In October 1780, Nathaniel Greene took command and split his army, forcing the British General Cornwallis on a cat-and-mouse chase through the Carolinas. Cornwallis sustained losses and ran out of supplies and was forced to retreat toward Yorktown, where the war would end. The end result of the war on the South was an American success. Despite some early losses, the Americans under Nathaniel Greene led the British on a series of cat-and-mouse chases through the Carolinas until they used up all of the supplies and had to retreat. Battles like those at Kings Mountain and Cowpen seemed to seal the fate for the British forces and give the Americans the advantage they needed to achieve victory. Let's evaluate the war effort. Both in this lesson and the previous lesson, it seems clear that the American advantage was its leadership. Good generals such as Washington, Arnold, Morgan, Greene learned from their mistakes and adjusted their strategies when it was necessary. Unlike the British generals, who seemed to find it difficult to work with one another and tended to stick with a strategy even when it wasn't working. There are lessons to learn from this situation. First, you learn from your mistakes. Do not dwell on them. Second, be willing to adjust your plans when plans do not work or prove ineffective. History is indeed a great teacher, and the events covered here reveal these useful pieces of wisdom. So this is an insight. I mean, this is something I thought about when I thought about these events. The idea of history is to learn from it and grow from it. And certainly the events we see happening in this Southern campaign are a lesson to all of us that, sometimes when things aren't going the way you want them to go, maybe you need a different plan. And that's okay to look at different plans and different options. Especially if all you're doing is beating your head against a wall. That's metaphoric, not for real. But if you're doing the same thing over and over again and you're not producing any success, try something new, right? And we see the American generals doing that. We see the British just being stubborn. First of all, not working with anyone else. There's no team spirit there. And second of all, just sticking with strategies that don't even work. And I think that was their biggest failure. I think that's where they failed the most. Hey, this is the end of Lesson 3. Excellent job. We've only got one more go, the final years. So we'll get to that in a little while. Once again, all this information is from Discovering Our Past, A History of the United States. This is read along is created for educational use only. It's a supplemental tool. It should not be sold or purchased in any manner. It's only here to make you a better student. And I will see you for the final years in our next presentation. Thank you.